What's up, metal and heavy music fans? It's Flight of Icarus again with MetalTrenches.com, and today I'm going to give you my album rankings for Canadian industrial band Skinny Puppy. But before I do that, if you'd like to stay up to date with the best and brightest metal bands and albums from the underground and above, then stick with me by hitting that subscribe button down below. Let's get into it. All right, we've got to start all the way back in 1984 with Remission. And I kind of got into these guys around Too Dark Park. You can also check out, I did an episode of Bands That Changed My Life talking about Skinny Puppy. And Too Dark Park was my entry point. But from there, I backtracked and I listened to the full discography, going so far as to even go out and buy every single album on CD, which was no small feat for a high schooler who did not have a job at the time, but it was definitely worth it. This album, it's fine, and I will mind you that I'm ranking these in terms of their original track listing, more or less. So I know some people may look at this, and even if you look at the back of my CD copy here, there are a lot more songs on this album, but that's because they kind of filled it up with some extra B-sides and other material from other albums and different versions and things like that. But this that you're looking at, to my knowledge, is the original track listing when this album dropped. And it's good. I mean, Smothered Hope was a good kind of indication of things to come, and then Solvent's a pretty solid track too. It's still very 80s, the synths are very kind of just of the era, and it has a certain charm in that. But as far as, you know, is this one of my favorite albums to listen to from them? Not particularly, but it doesn't fall in D rank either. I feel pretty good about putting that one at C. And then we jump forward just a year to 1984 with Bites, and kind of a similar situation here. Still got a lot of that 80s influence on it. It's a fine album. It's of the time again, but again, we're moving towards that sort of classic Skinny Puppy sound. And of course, Assimilate is sort of, I feel like, their kind of first big hit, so to speak. I don't know how much of a big commercial hit it was, but it was a good song, and it's still a fun one to listen to. Interesting, too, just thinking about the type of music that was playing at this time and thinking about this really just kind of ugly vocal delivery that Ogre had and what reactions to it might have been. Again, this is the closest to original track listing on here, although my copy, again, has a bunch of extra stuff. But The Choke is also a solid song. Dead Lines, definitely hearing that aggression coming through, which was something that definitely attracted me to this band above some of the other industrial bands that I heard. But yeah, good beginning, but still nothing too incredible going on here. But now let's really start to get in the heart of it with 1987's Cleansefold and Manipulate. This is where you really start to hear Skinny Puppy start to sound like Skinny Puppy. They kind of have ditched some of their more 80s sounding trappings at this time, moving more into kind of that 90s sound, although it's still obviously 87. We're not quite there yet, but we're shifting gears. I really like the cover of this one, moving into kind of those horror movie elements too. I believe that image of the girl with the glowing eye, I think it's a girl, is actually from a horror movie, and I'm forgetting which one. They use a lot of horror movie imagery, especially, we'll talk about that when I get to Rabies for a specific reason. But yeah, it's a good album. We're moving in the right direction. Addiction is a great track. First Aid is really good. Deep Down Trauma Hounds is definitely one of my favorites from the band overall. So lots of good stuff here, and even the deeper cuts are pretty solid. Is it one of the ones that I kind of reach for regularly when I'm in the mood to listen to Skinny Puppy? Not necessarily, but we're definitely moving into, I'd say, about B-tier territory with this one. All right, now we're in 1989 with Mind, the Perpetual Intercourse. Now we're getting into the heart of it here. Another great album, a little bit not safe for work, although it's blurred enough that you can't really necessarily tell that. I really enjoy this album. Lots of great cuts on here. Again, moving more and further into kind of their true Skinny Puppy sound. You got One Time, One Place, which is a great album opener. Very atmospheric, very dark and haunting. more of that kind of horror side of things coming out. God's Gift Maggot, classic, very aggressive, very raw track. Fun to sing along with that God's Gift Maggot. Just very, just intense song. Dig It, classic. A little bit of trivia too. 9 Inch Nails was accused of kind of ripping off Dig It with their track. I think it's is it Down in It? That's the one. One of their earlier tracks on their first album. They were accused of ripping off Dig It. Another great song to sing along to too. That dig it kind of thing going on there. Some of the still a little bit uneven, but lots of good stuff on here. Some experimental elements too. Kevin Key and Dwayne really kind of playing with different ideas, especially with things like Love, which is this more kind of melodic, more instrumental track. But then you've got the more intense stuff too. So pretty dynamic album too. And yeah, just continuing to step up and deliver on more interesting sounds. I kind of want to put this at A tier, because it's a little bit better than Cleanse, Fold, Manipulate. I'm going to put it there for now and kind of see how things pan out if I move things around or leave it there. But that feels pretty good. But now 1988 is where things get really good with VivisectVI, or you can pronounce it a bunch of different ways. It's kind of a pun because you got the VivisectVI, so it's technically 666 with sect in it. I used to say VivisectVI, but I hear most people, I think, say VivisectVI. Definitely S tier album. Don't want to bury the lead on that one. Fantastic stuff. So many amazing songs on here. Easily one of their best, and my favorite of kind of their earlier era sound before we start moving into the 90s. Dog shit, great opener. That's just letting you know how it is with their song titles too. Not wanting to lull any parents into a false sense of security. Like, you see this on the album shelf, you see the album art, and you turn it over and you look at these song titles, and there is no question as to what you're getting into. VX Gas Attack, one of my favorite songs. Hearthstone White is also really good. Not sure why I don't even have it hearted on here. I went through a period where I had to kind of cut down on some of the songs I had on my phone, so that might be the reason. But Human Disease, Scum, Testure, absolute classic. Who's Laughing Now is also really good. Really, every song on here is awesome. You've got some weirdest stuff, particularly Fritter. Stella's Home is much more experimental. But outside of that, like, this is a very consistent, very enjoyable album to listen to. Strangely catchy for how intense and odd and aggressive it can be, but definitely one of their better albums. If you're getting into Skinny Puppy, you haven't really listened to them a lot here, this is a decent place to start for sure. All right, then we're in 1989 with Rabies. This is another really great album. Not quite S tier, I would say, for a couple of different reasons. They actually recorded this with the help of Al Jorgensen of Ministry fame, and it kind of led to some conflict between band members. As I recall, I don't think Kevin and Al got along too well from what I've heard, but him and Ogre got on pretty well. So it was very mixed, and it's interesting to look into the history of this one too, because this copy that I'm holding, so this is like the original mix that Al, from my understanding, again, kind of had a lot of control over, and you hear a lot of his very classic Ministry sounding guitars on some of these tracks, and the guitars are very loud, in fact, kind of beratingly so, and so I think that has led some fans to have a lot of issues with this album. There is an alternate version of the mix, which I was able to track down at some point, and I love the alternate mix because it brings Kevin's keys back up, because they're so muted on this version that you can barely hear them. Like, it's like listening to a completely different album almost when you hear the shift and the guitars come down a little bit and the keys come up. There's a lot of really intricate, cool melodies that happen on these songs that you'll miss out on. So if you can find that version, it's definitely hard to buy physically. You're going to mostly end up with this. There is a way to tell. I've looked it up. I forget now, but by looking at, I think on the disc itself, or maybe on the details on the back. But in any case, rambling on here, it's a really solid album with a lot of great tracks. Rodent, excellent opener. Hexon X, just good stuff. And Tin Omen, classic track, play on Tiananmen. So many good things, but particularly Warlock. Like, Warlock is the crown jewel of this album, and one of the best songs they've ever done. It has this just so powerful synth opening that just puts you in this sense of awe, or at least it does for me every time, even when I listen to it now. Even talking about it now kind of gives me goosebumps. And then it shifts into this just really intense, echoey bass drum and snare from the electronic drum kit, and then just kind of like a lot of samples and really haunting, just like minimalistic vocals from Ogre. And then it develops into this big, powerful chorus that also has allusions to Charles Manson, who you see on the cover there too. And supposedly I've heard, because he references Blue, which was one of Manson's like right-hand cult women in his crew that went down in court. But yeah, fantastic song, and it's accompanied by a music video that was famously not able to be played pretty much anywhere, not only because it portrayed some of the most graphic violence from horror movies over the years. And it's really intense. Like, it has a lot of like Giallo era horror violence, which is insanely graphic. And then on top of that, because it's literally just made up purely of spliced together footage from movies, there's a lot of copyright issues too. But you can find it on YouTube, usually re-uploaded, and it's worth watching. It was kind of just a middle finger to censorship in general, as part of their ongoing just sort of like, fuck you, we take issue with a lot of stuff and we're going to say what we want to say sort of thing. And who can't respect that? But really great album. It falls a little bit after you get past Tin Omen, because you get into some more sort of experimental stuff, some tracks that don't quite hold up as well. And then Spawn Dirge is this 16.5-minute just sort of free-form jam session that doesn't really fit in. You can kind of consider it a bonus track, I suppose. But yeah, it's not as concise as some of their best albums. But other than that, really fantastic stuff. All right, and then going back to back here, this should come as no surprise that Too Dark Park is also S tier for sure. Just absolute legendary album. Probably one of the most important industrial albums of the genre, period. Especially if we're looking at the 90s. It's up there, man. Like, this is such an album. It's a mind blower. Again, this was the one that got me into the band too. I remember I was big on Nine Inch Nails, and again, I talked about this in I think the Bands That Changed My Life episode, but been listening to a lot of Nine Inch Nails, but was looking to sort of expand my horizons, find other similar music. And I saw in an interview that Trent had listed Skinny Puppy as one of his major influences. And so I'm like, oh, that sounds interesting. Went and checked it out, happened upon this particular album, and probably got it through like LimeWire or something. Although you see it in my hand now, I paid for it. Press play on Convulsion, and just my mind melted. This is not for the faint of heart, but again, strangely, kind of like once you sort of get past the weirdness and intensity of it, it's also strangely catchy. There's a lot of really catchy elements on here in some of the kind of bassier synth elements, and it has a sense of kind of danceability to some of it, despite the very dark just intense content. I keep using the same words here, but a lot of environmentalism, a lot of kind of warnings about the future, a lot of animal activism and things like that portrayed on the concept of this album. But it's still just very fun to listen to, at least for me. But initially, when you play Convulsion, it's just going to sound like crazy noise, but it has one of the most classic intros of all time with he's seeing monsters, he is losing his mind, and he feels it going. And so this is a band that also utilizes a lot of particularly horror movie samples. In fact, on another album we're going to get to, they had to have a song removed because of a sample that they had. But it all just fits the concept so well. It adds to the atmosphere, and I feel like they have not done a better album than this one. It is just fantastic, start to finish. I know that you may call me crazy again if you're not an initiate with this band and you're trying them out. I do encourage you to listen to it, but I say give it at least like a good 5 listens all the way through before you make a decision on it, because it initially sounded like noise, but over time it'll start to make sense. And once you kind of break through that threshold, you'll be rewarded. It is so fantastic. Recorded in 1990 in my old hometown of Chicago too, which just is another added element of this being a special album for me. And I can't say enough good things about it. All right, then we move to 1991 with Last Rites, and this is an album that I see commonly a lot of Skinny Puppy fans list as their favorite album. Me personally, it doesn't quite do it for me as much. I respect it greatly. I love the album art, and I love the track Inquisition. That is a like dance club goth, the type of music you'd hear in like an underground windowless club full of people wearing sunglasses in the dark and pleather pants and all that kind of stuff. Lots of dark tattoos on pale skin, but yeah, great song. Oh, and as I referenced before, a little bit of trivia too, some of you may notice that there is a track that is not on most CD versions called Left Handshake, and that was what I was talking about. This song was removed due to a sample it had on it from a movie that they could not get the rights to, and I forget what the movie was and who owned the rights, but they ultimately were not willing to let it go, and it had to be dropped. But you can find copies of the song and add it back to your digital collection to make it part of the rest of the album. It's a solid song. There's nothing particularly special about it, but it's good. The rest of this album, very experimental. Probably their most overall experimental album in general. Lots of really weird songs on here. And it's just for that reason, it's definitely probably their most acquired taste. If you are new to Skinny Puppy, I would definitely not recommend starting here, although I've heard people say that. Don't do it. Like, I think it'll scare you away. I would work your way to this album later on. But there are some other good songs. Love in Vain and Killing Game are pretty solid. Scrapyard is interesting. But yeah, it's much more kind of weird. It's not like catchy in any way, really, like some of the other albums are. And so for all those reasons, I put this one more at, I guess, I'd say A tier, but I'm not sure that I can. Because I don't listen to it a whole lot, even though I've tried. I try to come back to it every couple of years to see if my opinion has changed on it, because often things do. But ultimately, I just find myself a little bit bored and kind of confused. And I mean, that's, I think, part of the purpose of the album, but I just can't really do it. So for me personally, I put it a B tier. If I'm trying to be a little bit more objective and consider like the overall fan opinion, I'd probably put it more at A tier, but we'll just leave it at that. All right, and then tragedy struck, unfortunately. We're jumping forward several years here to 1996 with a lot of band turmoil, a lot of drug use, and the death of Dwayne Godel due to heroin overdose, and the Skinny Puppy dropping down to 2 members and being uncertain about the future, and that's The Process. Now, this was supposed to be kind of a concept album discussing like a cult and a character sort of going through the whole process of ending up in the cult and their mentality changing and all this kind of stuff. But unfortunately, due to all the things that happened during the recording process, it was never fully finished. But what we ended up with, all things considered, is what I think it's a great album. This is another one I hear some of the Skinny Puppy fans kind of poo-poo because it's just a little bit too like mainstream sounding at times. The tracks are a little bit more straightforward. It's not as experimental. A lot of it sounds more like stuff that could end up even being played on the radio, though not bloody likely, really. But I really love it. I think it's great. There's so many great tracks. Jaya Death is one of their heaviest tracks ever, with this like driving, distorted guitar, which is a little bit outside of what they were usually doing. Candle, on the other hand, has a really cool melody to it that gets stuck in your head, kind of sad sounding too. Hard Set Head, another heavy one. Amnesia, very haunting. A lot of songs on here, very haunting. Cult also. Start to finish, like, I really enjoy this one. There are some kind of dips here and there. And Cellar Heat is just sort of an outro. But I like this one enough that it's one of my regular listens, to the point where I even put it at A tier. Like, I really enjoy listening to this, and those are kind of my top 5 right there. Like, when I want to listen to Skinny Puppy, it's generally going to be one of these albums. All right, so it's at this point that unfortunately Skinny Puppy broke up or went on an extended hiatus, and it seemed like we weren't going to hear from them again. But kind of interestingly, I got into the band just a year or two before they just happened to get back together. So unlike most people who had to have this like long wait between albums, I got into them, and then like within a usual album cycle, I had a new album, and that one was 2004's The Greater Wrong of the Right. I hear a lot of mixed opinions on this album. I happen to really enjoy it. There's a pretty big shift here in terms of Ogre's vocal style, where it's less kind of throaty and gravelly and harsh, a lot more kind of clean stuff, more of what you hear from his Ogre solo project or side project, which, by the way, he's got some good albums over there too, maybe for another time. But L'Immortal, Protest is sort of this like, the music video even had like kids like breakdancing on a piece of cardboard on the street, which some people did not particularly like because they didn't feel like it fit with their overall aesthetic, but it's a really catchy track. New World is a fun and kind of weird sounding one. There's a sort of haunting element to the way that they play with some of the vocals with the electronics. And Past Present is a pretty powerful track too. Overall, a great comeback album. I like the simplicity of the album art too, just sort of feeling like, okay, this is the new Skinny Puppy. We're resituating ourselves in a new decade. And I like it enough that I would probably put this one at B tier. There was a time where I might have even put it at A tier, but it's sort of drifted a little bit in my rotation since then. And yeah, but of the newer era stuff, this is probably my favorite. Then in 2007, we got Mythmaker, another one with great album art. I really love the look of this one. Very kind of like the type of art you'd see accompanying some sort of political news story or something like that, but with a lot more color and detail. I really loved this album when it first came out. In fact, I, for a while, liked it better than Greater Wrong of the Right. There's a lot of funny kind of play on words and solid songs too. Magnificent is pretty solid opener. I feel like it hasn't worn as well with time, but I still really like Pedifly. I like Ja Her. There are some really great synth elements here from Kevin, really playing with a lot of different styles. Pastern's pretty good. Ugly is a decent outro. But ultimately, over the years, this one has kind of, unlike some albums that just have grown on me with time, this one has not worn well over the years for a number of different reasons. It's pretty inconsistent too. Some of the deeper cuts are just sort of meh to me at this point. So even though I still enjoy elements of it, I want to put it at like B or even C potentially. I think I got to put it at C. I almost wish I had an extra tier here just to sort of differentiate some of these a little bit better. But yeah, I think it's an average album. It's not particularly bad, but it's not like moving into kind of good territory either. And that was actually the last album that I bought from the band, because 2011's Handover, I just do not like this album. This is another one I've given chance time and time again, hoping that maybe some element of it will click for me and I just missed something, but I just find this to be an intensely boring album with not a whole lot to show for it, so I'm putting it at D tier. There are decent songs on here. Colorblind's alright. Asha's is pretty good. Ick Turns, Viruses, Village, they're all decent, but none of them, like, despite how many times I've listened to them, I couldn't even, like, in my head remember what they sound like without playing them over again. Whereas with other albums, like, I see a song title, I instantly hear the song playing in my head. So just nothing really sticks from this album. I'd be interested to hear in the comments if other people have intensely different thoughts on this one. But yeah, for me, it's D tier. It's probably my least favorite of the entire discography. And then capping things off, we've got 2013's Weapon. And this is, it's a decent album. I was pleased with it coming off of this last one that I just absolutely did not like. It's still kind of C tier, just sort of an average album, but I was intrigued that they sort of went back to their roots, it felt like, on this one. I'm hearing a lot more of those like 80s elements seeping back in, coming full circle at this point, which is appropriate considering this is the last album we've gotten from them in a while now. But yeah, it's got some decent tracks. Worn In, Illicit's pretty good. Paragon, Pseudonama, and then they even, speaking of coming full circle, they did a cover of their own song Solvent and reworked it to have sort of a different sound to it, and it's pretty good. It's pretty good. Yeah, cool album. Not one I reach for a lot. Pretty average, but yeah, that kind of does it. So that's the discography of Skinny Puppy. I'm not going to include these ones down here because they're not really full release albums. They're sort of B-sides, and let me tell you, there are a ton of like B-sides albums for Skinny Puppy. That'll do it for now. Flight of Icarus signing off. I will see you in the trenches.